Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Be a bit hard for you to see with me behind me like that. Durbhago Bata Loko Ayang Durbago Bata Loko Yang Durbago Bata Loko Yang Yadavo Nitaram Api Yadavo Nitaram Api Yadavo Nitaram Api Durbago Bata Loko Yang Yadavo Nitaram Api Ye Sangvasanto Na Vidu Ye Sangvasanto Na Vidur Ne Sangvasanto Na Vidu Haring Mina Ivodupam Haring Mina Ivodupam Haring Mina Ivodupam Ye Sangvasanto Na Vidu Haring Mina Ivodupam Durbago Bata Loko Yang Yadavo Nitaram Api Ye Sangvasanto Na Vidur Haring Mina Ivodupam Durbago Bata Loko Yang Yadavo Nitaram Api Ye Sangvasanto Na Vidur Haring Mina Ivodupam Durbago Bata Loko Yang Yadavo Nitaram Api
Durbago Ataloko Yam Yadavo Nitaram Api Esam Vasanto Navidu Hare Mina Ivodupam Durbago Ataloko Yam Yadavo Nitaram Api Esam Vasanto Navidu Harimena Yovodupam.
Durbhaga, unfortunate. Bata, certainly. Loka, universe. Ayam, this. Yadava, the Yadu dynasty. Nitaram, more specifically. Api, also. Ye, those. Sang Vasanta, living together. Na, did not. Vidu, understand. Harim, the personality of Godhead. Mina, the fishes. Eva Udupam, like the moon. Translation: this universe with all its planets is most unfortunate, and even more unfortunate are the members of the Yadu dynasty, because they could not identify Lord Hari as the personality of Godhead, any more than the fish could identify the moon. Responsibly, please. This universe with all its planets is most unfortunate, And even more unfortunate are the members of the Yadu dynasty, because they could not identify Lord Hari as the personality of Godhead any more than the fish could identify the moon. So, very interesting section of the Bhagavatam here, talking about Uddhava and actually manifesting ecstatic symptoms upon being. Because we see, like, if we look at the I think it's probably the last verse in the previous chapter, how Vidura is begging, he says, oh my friend, please therefore chant the glories of the Lord, who is meant to be glorified in the places of pilgrimage. So he's begging Uddhava to recite these pastimes. He wants to hear about Krishna, even though he knows that Krishna has departed, and that because he's feeling separation from Krishna, he's understanding that by hearing the pastimes of Krishna, this is the same as associating with Krishna. So therefore, when he questions Uddhava enters into, he starts to sort of become overwhelmed by ecstatic symptoms. So he enters into a trance and he can't respond. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. I'll just read the purport. Uddhava lamented for the unfortunate persons of the world who could not recognize Lord Sri Krishna in spite of seeing all his transcendental godly qualities. From the very beginning of his appearance within the prison bars of King Kamsa up to his Morshala Leela, although he exhibited his potencies as the personality of Godhead in 6 opulences of wealth, strength, fame, beauty, knowledge and renunciation, the foolish persons of the world could not understand that he was the Supreme Lord. Foolish persons might have thought him an extraordinary historic figure because they had no intimate touch with the Lord. But more unfortunate were the family members of the Lord, the members of the Yadu dynasty, who were always in company with the Lord, but were unable to recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Uddhava lamented his own fortune also because although he knew Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he could not properly use the opportunity to render devotional service to the Lord. He regretted everyone's misfortune, including his own. A pure devotee of the Lord thinks himself most unfortunate. That is due to excessive love for the Lord and is one of the transcendental perceptions of viraha, the suffering of separation. So here we see the Prabhupada, you've got to kind of, in one sense, read between the lines a bit. But the commentaries, the other commentaries, the Acharyas also helped understand this. That out of prem, we see that Vidura, he's criticizing the members of the Yadu dynasty, and he's also criticizing himself. What we see happening here is he's saying that actually the Yadus, they couldn't understand Krishna's position, and as a fact, they understood that Krishna was the Paramatma, but they didn't understand that he was the source of the Paramatma, this Swayam Bhagavan, the Samambonam, that he was the source of everything, which again is kind of interesting. Because it's like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur describes how they were appreciating his sweetness but not his power. And so Uddhava's criticizing that. But we see later in the 10th canto, it's described that actually this is higher, is to appreciate the sweetness but not the power. This is, and that's the gopis, the resident of Braj. They were completely absorbed in the sweetness. They couldn't care less that he was God. That was not their interest at all. So we see, because Uddhava's in this state of prem and he's experiencing ecstasy, that he just becomes a little bit kind of bewildered, if you like, a little bit confused. And that's, if we look in the, I think it's the 28th chapter of the, I was reading this the other day. I was meant to give class earlier on in the week, but I just had a really bad night's sleep, so I couldn't make it. So there's chapter 28, existential ecstatic love. It just describes 8 different symptoms of ecstasy. But this is describing what's called sattvika bhava. So sattvika bhava, even though sattva refers to goodness, in this case it's referring to purified goodness or transcendental goodness, not referring to mundane goodness. And one who's on the transcendental stage can experience these types of symptoms. And there's different types of ecstatic symptoms, whereas there's ecstatic symptoms where one is, they're feeling some ecstasy, therefore they decide to do something. And I could think of a pastime like this with Srila Prabhupada, for instance, in that one time he was in India and he was feeling some kind of disturbance in the stomach, blood dysentery or something like that, and he was feeling quite unwell. And then, they're discussing with devotees. They got a Kaviraj, and the Kaviraj tried to. He diagnosed and he gave him some medicine. The medicine didn't work, and then Prabhupada, he asked his sister Bhavatarini or Pishima, as they would affectionately refer to her, to cook him some puri and portal. And the devotees are thinking, well, but if you eat this, Prabhupada, it's going to make you worse. And he said, no, my mother said this is good for this. So Pishima made it, and a few hours later he ate it, and a few hours later he felt fine. But his health wasn't very good at this time. But then I can't remember all the detail of the story, but he wound up deciding that he wanted to go to London because Shama Sundar had sent him an email, and in this email, Shama Sundar was sort of saying we're going to hold the Rath Yatra festival. It's going to go from Hyde Park down to Trafalgar Square, and he was saying all these wonderful things that were going to happen. Of course, Prabhupada knew that Shama Sundar was exaggerating, because he knew Shama Sundar quite well. He knew that Shama Sundar was exaggerating to get Prabhupada there, but nonetheless Prabhupada could see that this was a tremendous preaching opportunity, so he went. And when he got to the Rath Yatra, the devotees, they had prepared the cart, and they had one cart, and they had Vyasasan on the cart for Srila Prabhupada to sit on. And then Prabhupada, he declined to sit on. He said, no, I'm just an ordinary devotee. I'll just, I'll dance in the kirtan. I'll be in the kirtan with the devotees. So he did that, and then the chariot started to move off, and they had Ray Bhakti Nandan, I think he was a Maharaj at the time, up on the chariot, and other devotees were leading the kirtan. He told them to get down and be with the other devotees. And then so they had these fantastic kirtans. Hangsadutta was leading. Hangsadutta at that time was considered one of the great kirtanias in ISKCON, and Ray Bhakti Nandan and Shama Sundar and different devotees were leading kirtan. And then Srila Prabhupada, he danced the whole way, which he considered, Prabhupada's age, he's well into his 70s, probably into his 80s at that time. And I think this was 1973 or 4 or something like that. And Prabhupada was born in 96, was it? 1896, I think. And I think it was 1896 that Prabhupada was born. So he would have been, around 80. And anyhow, so he danced the whole way, and the police were, like sometimes Prabhupada would be moving so fast the chariots couldn't keep up. They're trying to pull the chariots, and sometimes you'd slow down, and the chariots would have to stop. And devotees were reflecting, this was just like Lord Chaitanya's pastimes in Puri, how the chariot was moving according to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's dancing. And the police were getting very concerned because they thought it was creating a traffic jam, so they're trying to encourage devotees to get Prabhupada to sit down on the chariot and stop dancing because it was creating such a disturbance. And even Shruti Kirti Prabhu at one point went up and spoke to Prabhupada and said, asked Prabhupada, the police are saying you're causing a disturbance, creating chaos in the procession. They want you to sit down. Prabhupada just looked at him and just kept dancing. So we can see how this is a manifestation of Srila Prabhupada's ecstatic symptoms, because old man, externally an old man, old body, yet he's dancing the whole procession, which went for over an hour. I mean, I don't know if you've been on that procession in London. It's quite a long procession. It's not as long as, say, for instance, some of the other ones I've been on, but it's a lengthy procession. It's a very blissful procession. You can look down. When you get to Piccadilly, you can look down I think it's Regent Street, and you can see like their chariots lined up. But not just that, tens of thousands of devotees and people just gathered around dancing and chanting. It's quite an amazing Rath Yatra. And Prabhupada danced the whole period. He's playing his kartals, he's dancing, and like there was a ring of devotees around him holding hands to keep the crowd back from that. But the whole event was so ecstatic. And devotees actually had this perception of Srila Prabhupada's ecstasy. They felt this wasn't something ordinary, what was going on here. They actually got that perception. So in the same way we see here, Uddhava. And there's many similarities between Uddhava's childhood and pastimes, just like you see, like Uddhava, how he was so attentive to his deity worship. We see Prabhupada in his youth, he organised that Rath Yatra for Lord Jagannath, and he went on for 8 days, and he orchestrated the whole thing, and he was very determined that it was to be done properly and everything like that. And he got all his friends, and even all the neighbourhood families, the ladies were cooking, and so Prabhupada had this same kind of love for Krishna. And he was manifesting it through his service. And even, he would go to Radha Govinda, and him and his sister would stand there for hours and hours and hours just staring at the deities. Prabhupada said actually that this whole Krishna consciousness movement started from that when he was a child in Calcutta, and he used to go to Radha Govinda. So we see also here how as describing a few verses ago, how Uddhava, he became stunned and this whole section here, this early part of the Bhagavatam, or the early part of this chapter, is just describing Uddhava's ecstasies. There was a time in the late 60s in San Francisco where Govinda Dasi had asked Prabhupada a question. She wasn't sure if it was appropriate to ask the question, but she wanted to find out about Lord Chaitanya's instruction. I think he was instructing, can't remember who. Sorry, I'm just a bit vague on the pastime. But it's a really interesting pastime, because what happened was she'd asked Prabhupada this question, and Prabhupada, he went, and he started to become sort of reflective, and then he started to explain, but then he just became absorbed, and he was sitting there for quite some time. It's described here, if you actually look at verse 4, it mentions that Prabhupada translates it differently. He may be trying to sort of play down the whole thing, but he says, Sa Muhurtam Abhut Tushnim. So what does Muhurta mean? Muhurta. It means about 30, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, something like that. It's a bit flexible depending on the season. But he became silent, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, for 48 minutes. He was just stunned. So we see that in this time that Prabhupada was asked this question by Govinda Dasi, he did explain a little bit, and then he went, and he just became absorbed, and he didn't speak. And then it went on, Prabhupada went to pick up his kartals, and then and just the same thing. And apparently, according to the devotees, this went on for about 4 or 5 minutes, where Prabhupada was just absorbed in this, ecstatic state. So involuntary. He was just overwhelmed. And this is what they call, this is sattvika bhava. When someone becomes overwhelmed by these ecstatic symptoms and they can't control what's happening, this is sattvika bhava. They just become overwhelmed by that. So we see that happened to Prabhupada. And then at the end, he managed to sort of play the kartals. He chanted Govinda Jaya Jaya for about 10 minutes, and then finished, got up and left. He said, this was a very nice question. And that was it. So we see that in Srila Prabhupada's life also, he manifested this. He became stunned, perspiring, all this sort of stuff. Sometimes devotees would see that tears would squirt from Prabhupada's eyes, just these involuntary ecstatic symptoms. So this is what was happening for Uddhava. And now when he starts to speak, he's becoming a little bit sort of confused, and he's saying, well, he's criticizing the Yadavas, and he's even criticizing himself. And part of the reason he's criticizing himself is that, because the Yadavas have all entered back into the uppercut lila of the Lord, but he's still there on the planet, and he's feeling this separation. So it's kind of, Srila Prabhupada, I see here he does play it down a fair bit, because he doesn't get too much into what's happening, obviously because of the audience he's addressing, like ourselves. We're not particularly advanced, we don't particularly understand these types of things so well. But you can see here that if you look at it a little bit more closely, you can see that Uddhava is manifesting very, very advanced symptoms of love of Godhead, and these are being manifested here. A little bit more purport here. It is learned from revealed scriptures that the moon was born from the milk ocean. There is a milk ocean in the upper planets, and there Lord Vishnu, who controls the heart of every living entity, every living being as Paramatma, the Supersoul, resides as the Chiradakshaya Vishnu. Those who do not believe in the existence of the ocean of milk, because they have experience only of the salty water in the ocean, should know that the world is also called the go, which means the cow. The urine of a cow is salty, and according to Ayurvedic medicine, the cow's urine is very effective in treating patients suffering from liver trouble. So it just goes off on a completely different, it seems, on a completely different tangent. Such patients may not have any experience of the cow's milk because the milk is never given to liver patients. So you see, like, they can drink the urine from the milk, which is salty, but they can't drink the milk, which is sweet. And I have the same experience because I have hepatitis. I can't drink milk. So you don't get to taste that sweetness because of the disease. So also because of the disease of this material conditioning, they can't understand the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes. They think it's all, just fiction. They think it's all just nice stories. But they don't actually understand the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes because they're suffering from this jaundice of material conditioning. And Prabhupada would often use this analogy to indicate how people are suffering in this material world. But the liver patients may know that the cow has milk also, although he has never tasted it. Similarly, men who have experience only of this tiny planet, where the saltwater ocean exists, may take information from revealed scriptures. There is also an ocean of milk, although we have never seen it. And this is the point of accepting a high authority. It's just like, we may not have been to some place on this planet. Like say, for instance, we may not have been to New York. But we can hear from someone who's been to New York what it looks like. And, we accept that. Even though we personally haven't had an experience, we can learn from another person's experience. And it's just like we see here, it's being described, the manifestation of Uddhava, how he's experiencing these ecstatic symptoms. We ourselves don't have those experiences because, at least myself, I don't have this experience because, I don't have love of Krishna. Nothing like what's going on here. Yet, from reading the pastimes of these great personalities and from reading the description of our Acharya, Srila Prabhupada, we can understand something about what this is. So that, if we see this being manifest, we can have some understanding of what's going on. And then Prabhupada goes on, from this ocean of milk the moon was born, but the fish in the milk ocean could not recognize that the moon was not another fish and was different from them, because they're thinking it's coming out of the ocean, therefore it's just another fish. It's just like there's a story Prabhupada tells about there was a coal mine in Wales, and the Christian preacher was going to the coal mine and trying to convince them to worship Jesus Christ or to accept Jesus Christ as their Savior. And so they asked him all about these questions about Jesus Christ. And then the coal miners, they said, what is his number? Because all the coal miners have a number. And they were thinking that, Jesus Christ was just another one of them. So, because they can't see outside their own world view. Like everything is the coal mine, so everyone else who exists must work in the coal mine. And so they're asking his number and stuff like that. And then so the Christian preacher was trying to convince them but if you don't accept Jesus Christ, you're going to go to hell. And so they said, well, what's hell like? And they said, it's very cold and dark and damp. And they said, that sounds like the coal mine. So they weren't convinced. And then the Christian preacher said to the coal miners, he said, there's no newspapers in hell. And they said, oh, this is a very bad place. So they had this whole world view, and anything outside that world view they couldn't understand it. So he had to, as a preacher, he had to kind of bring it into their understanding so they can understand how they need to accept Jesus Christ, and they need to, and how hell is like not a very nice place, and that's we find the same thing. It's like, if we for instance tell people in this world, you're suffering in this material world, especially young people, they just don't believe you, because from their perspective they're not suffering, even though they're out getting madly intoxicated every night practically, and waking up the next day with hangovers and stuff like that. They still think they're having a good time. They still think they're enjoying. So somehow or other, the trick is to show them how there is a better life than what they're experiencing now, an eternal life of happiness. But it's easier when you get older, because you really start to suffer. The body just gives you a lot of grief. I'm in my 60s now, and I can tell you, the body's giving me a lot of grief. Whereas 20 years ago, no perception of that. So, and there's another story I can think of which kind of helps us to see how, even though we may come across great fortune or great material opulence, because we have this like limited world view. This is why studying Shastra is very important, because it helps us to see broader. And Prabhupada's making this point here. By studying the revealed scriptures, we can see that there's much more to life than what we can perceive. So there was a man. He was I think I forgot what they call him, but he's like in the wet part of Bengal. There's many canals, and these guys, they have this job with a heavy rope. They pull the boats through the canals. So someone was talking with this man whose job was pulling the boats, and they were talking about, what would he do if he became very wealthy. And so he was thinking that if I become very wealthy, I'm going to line the canal pathway with pillows. So when I'm pulling the boat, I can walk on the pillows instead of the hard ground. So we see, like, in this material world, that people are very much like that. That even if they become fortunate, so-called fortunate, they still try to see the fortune in terms of their worldview, in terms of what they're experiencing now. So they never think of like, if I can get out of this material world, then I'll go back to Godhead and or whatever like that. No, they think of how they're going to increase their enjoyment in this limited environment. They don't really have the vision to see beyond the environment they're in now. So through the study of the Shastra, through the association of advanced devotees, we actually get to see something beyond. There's a nice verse in the Rig Veda. Om tad Vishnu paramam param pashanti suraya divi vichakshuratatam tat vipuso vipravango jagri vagunsa samindate Vishnu yat paramam padam. It says, just as the wise and learned brahmanas are able... Om Tad Vishnu. They're able to see, just like you can see the sun in the sky, right? The wise and learned Brahmas, they can actually see the abode of the Lord. And because of their realization, they're able to reveal that abode of the Lord to others. So this is why the association of saintly persons is very, very important. Because they're actually, it's not, someone who's actually a saintly person, it's not theoretical for them. Just like with Srila Prabhupada. We can see from Prabhupada's manifest pastimes that devotional service, the experience of Krishna, the experience of the spiritual world, was not theoretical. He was actually experiencing Krishna, and he was actually experiencing the transcendental realm. And we see, different times this would burst out when he was manifesting ecstatic symptoms. Generally he would control it, but sometimes it would burst out. And he would reveal the spiritual abode. And so, for him it's a reality. And by associating with persons who are experiencing that reality, we also will experience that reality. So we can associate with Srila Prabhupada through his books, through reading about his pastimes, through associating with his disciples and grand disciples, through associating with other devotees. For devotees who have experience of Prabhupada. And not just personal direct experience, because there are very few devotees left now who have a direct personal experience of Prabhupada, but also devotees who have entered deeply into the spiritual understanding. They also experience Srila Prabhupada. They also experience the transcendental realm through this process of bhakti. It's a very, very powerful process. And the thing is, it's not just limited. Anyone can experience the spiritual realm. It's open to all. just through the process of bhakti, through applying ourselves diligently to the process of bhakti. And it's just like Prabhupada's using this analogy from the verse about how the fish, they can't understand, even though the moon comes out of the milk ocean, they can't understand, they think it's the same as them. And you look in this material world, it's like, they see, a transcendentalist, and because of their material conditioning, because the fog is Maya Prakriti Jnana, their knowledge is just stolen by illusion, they cannot understand the transcendental reality. And just like we were talking yesterday about religion, And of course we see that in this world, most people have quite bad experiences of religion, because religion, the practitioners of religion haven't actually been very saintly. And they've done many, many dishonest and immoral things. And so we see that people's general experience of religion is quite negative. Therefore, they tend to typecast all religions into the same category. And therefore, for instance, when ISKCON tries to work with councils for planning permissions and stuff like that, they give us all these rules. And you can't do anything to expand the preaching mission. And actually we see that most of these government agencies, councils, etc., in their activities towards religious groups are demoniac. They just try to restrict the religious groups and not understanding really that religious groups, especially those who are actively following their practice, are ultimately looking for the ultimate well-being of all living entities. The spiritual well-being of all living entities. They don't understand that because it's beyond their scope of vision. They have their planning rules, they have their bylaws, they have all this type of stuff. That's their scope of vision. And something like religion is just outside of that. And they can't understand it. So therefore they restrict. So the same way here, Prabhupada's talking about the fish, because the fish just has its worldview. It's thinking, it knows about the ocean, it knows about the fish in the ocean. It doesn't know much else. It knows there's big fish that eat me, there's the small fish, I eat them. That's about it. It doesn't really have much of a, it can't, it's just like, you see like an ant, an ant's crawling along the floor and then it comes and it gets on your foot and it crawls. It's got no concept. It can crawl all over your body, but it has no concept of how you are another living entity, you're such a vast body thing. It's just something it's crawling on. It's got no concept because of its vision is just confined to its very little world. And we're the same. The conditioned living entity is exactly the same. It's thinking like you meet with any person here in this city or this country and talk to them, someone who's not a transcendentalist, you talk to them about what's going on in their lives, their worldview, stuff like that. Very, very narrow. Very, very limited. They don't have any perception of a greater reality. And that's why the scriptures are so important. That's why the transcendentalists are so important. And that's why it's so important that we become transcendentalists. Rather than just externally going through the motions, we actually need to take to this practice very, very deeply so that we can help others to see the reality of what's going on in this world. Not that it's just, you get born, you go to school, you grow up, you get a job, you get married, you have children, you get old, you die, repeat. Just the same cycle. They don't see beyond that, and even most of them don't even understand the fact of rebirth. The cycle of birth and death. They don't understand samsara. They have very, very limited worldview, but and that's why I think this analogy of the fish is very interesting, because it helps us to see how the worldview is very, very limited when people are just caught up in their lives. And the point of Krishna consciousness is to help us to see the broader worldview, and that's Prabhupada makes this point here about reading the revealed. We can learn of these things through the revealed scriptures. The fish took the moon to be one of them, or maybe something illuminating, but nothing more. Just nothing fancy. And just like we see with Duryodhana, the epitome of an atheistic person, a demoniac person, right? Krishna manifested before him his universal form. Krishna manifested so many amazing pastimes. Duryodhana actually saw Krishna's universal form right in front of him. What do you say? It's just some magic. He couldn't accept it. That this was, when Bhishma's like, wow, you know, he's like completely, you know, jaw on the floor kind of thing, like this is amazing, you know. But Duryodhana was just some magic. He's just a magician, nothing impressive. The unfortunate persons who do not recognize Lord Krishna are like such fish. They take him to be one of them, although a little extraordinary in opulence, strength, etc. So a little extraordinary, a little, not very much. You know, like he's manifesting his universal form. And of course we understand that the universal form he manifested to Duryodhana was a partial universal form. It wasn't the same as the universal form that Krishna manifested, we see described in the 11th chapter of the Gita. Not the same. And a few others like Bhishma, Drona, you know, and others on the battlefield saw that universal form that Krishna manifested to Arjuna, but it wasn't the same universal form. It was a very, very much limited universal form. But still he saw it. Duryodhana saw it when he tried to capture Krishna. But he just thought it was magic. He wasn't open to the possibility that there was something greater than him. Really interesting story in the Mahabharata is Dronacharya, after his disciples have been through the whole training, etc. like that, he wanted to test them to see who was really the person to be qualified to be the king or the emperor. So he said, he sent them out on a mission, and he said to Duryodhana, I want you to go out throughout the land and see if you can find someone who's a greater person than you. Because he already had an understanding of their natures, but he just wanted to, you know, solidify that. And then he said to Yudhisthira, I want you to go out through the land and see if you can find a person who's lesser than you. Yeah? So they went out. Duryodhana, he came back after not much time. He said, you know, I looked everywhere and I checked out everyone, and I couldn't find anyone who's a better person than me. Yeah. And then much later, Yudhisthira came back, and he was I can't remember the detail of the story, but it's a very interesting story. He said he travelled everywhere, and I couldn't find a lesser person than me. But then I found this I think he said a Nishida or something, like a low class person, and he was mistreating his dog or something like that. And he said, I thought I had found someone lower than me. But then something happened where he realized actually he wasn't as low, he said, but he said, actually I've traveled the whole land and I cannot find a person who is lower than me. So you can see the quality of the person. You know, as you see with Duryodhana, he just thought there was nothing greater or nothing superior to him. You know, Hiranyakashipu, same kind of thing. Thought there was no one greater than him. When Vishnu manifested before him, you know, as Nrsimha, momentary fear, but then he just became overwhelmed with his false egos. I'll kill him, you know. But he couldn't. There's no chance. And so this is the nature of the atheist, or the demon, is they're thinking that there's no one, you know, superior to them, and they're going to kill them. And that we see that, you know, in the 16th, 17th chapter of the Gita. This is described, I think it's 16th, Ishvara hambo gisira hambaravam sukhi, that I am powerful, I am strong, I am happy. I'm the controller. This person is my enemy, I will kill them. This is the mentality they have. And they think they will conquer the world. But we see in due course of time, the material nature, time, the time factor wears them all down. They're all conquered by these things. But we see for a devotee because they understand Krishna's eternal nature, they understand Krishna's position as the Supreme Person of Godhead, then time doesn't conquer them. Even though the body may perish, but time doesn't conquer the devotee because the devotee never forgets Krishna. We see here with Uddhava and Vidura, they were at no point were they forgetting Krishna. We see that, you know, even Uddhava is criticizing himself, I forgot Krishna. But at no point was he forgetting Krishna. He was constantly absorbed in Krishna. And the last line, the Bhagavad Gita 9:11 confirms such foolish persons to be the most unfortunate. Avajanati mam mudha manasim taram ashritaha. Okay. So that's Srila Prabhupada's explanation of this. And as I'm saying again, we see here that Uddhava, because of his manifesting this prema, if you like, he's actually criticizing the Yadus and even himself But actually we can see they're the most fortunate persons because they're Krishna's eternal associates. Whether they understand Krishna as being this, the Swayam Bhagavan, the source of all, is not really that important, because the fact of it is they're his eternal associates and they're always engaged in pastimes with him. And as I mentioned, the 10th canto describes that this understanding the sweetness is much greater than understanding the power. It's a more elevated level of bhakti. Of course, it also is a manifestation of, a lesser manifestation of bhakti to understand the power. But we see as you go up the rung, so to speak, in terms of devotees, that the highest devotees, the residents of Braj, they have no concept of Krishna's nature as Supreme Person of Godhead. And even when it's revealed to them at different times, that oh no, we don't want to know about that. Even when Mother Yasoda, when she sees the universal form manifesting in Krishna's mouth, eventually that's given up because it's not conducive to it's an incompatible that this what do you call it, this it's almost like the ghastly rasa in one sense, but it's incompatible with her rasa, which is the parental rasa. Because when she sees this, this form of Krishna manifest in her mouth, she starts to get all into this Aishvarya sort of thing, and then she stopped thinking, she's stopping to think that Krishna is my child and I have to feed him, and then so Krishna covers her over because he's thinking, well, if she thinks I'm the Supreme Person of Godhead, who's going to feed me? So he covers that over, and then she just forgets about it all. Oh, he's my baby and I have to feed him breast milk, so she feeds him. So we can see how, even for the advanced devotees in Braj, when these rasas start to come up, then they get sort of removed by Krishna or they themselves. Same with Arjuna when he was on the battlefield. When he saw this universal form, that also generated fear, which was incompatible with his relationship with Krishna. So it couldn't sustain that. Yeah, very interesting section of the Bhagavatam. Any comments, questions?
Just one question on the rasa, because the transcendental flavor of one's rasa does change over the life.
Yeah. My understanding of that, not having experienced this sort of stuff so much, my understanding of that is it can change, but it usually doesn't. Yeah. Because this idea of changing things is quite material, because people want to change their situation because they're not satisfied. But you look at all these living entities who are having direct relationship with Krishna or even indirect relationship with Krishna. We see the 5 primary rasas, Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, Vatsalya, Madhurya. Even the living entities who are in a Shanta ras relationship, they're satisfied. They don't feel the need to change. They don't feel the need for something different. And they're happy serving Krishna like that. And then when they see others serving Krishna in other relationships, they're just, wow, they're so fortunate they get to serve Krishna like that, But and they may criticize themselves. Oh, I'm only this and I'm only that. But still, they're satisfied. They don't go hankering for something else. And it's not that like like in this material world, if you don't have ambition to go beyond what you're doing, you consider to be inferior. You consider to be like you got low self-esteem or something like that. But it's just driven by material ambition. They want to be top of the pile. There's another interesting story I heard the other day. I've heard it many times, but just someone was repeating it the other day. I can't remember where I heard it, but when Prabhupada went to Dai Nippon and he made his offer on what he's willing to pay them for the books, which they had to discuss because it was Prabhupada really lowballed them like anything. And so all the directors of the company went out and they left him with the junior manager. And then Prabhupada started to talk to him and was asking about himself. He said, so what's your ambition? And so this junior manager, he gathered up all the business cards and piled them all up. He put his down the bottom, and then he pulled it out and he put it on the top. So he's very ambitious. He wanted to be the top of the pile. But in the transcendental relationship, that's not there. You see, even amongst the gopis, and I don't understand so much about their pastimes because they're very, very elevated and completely devoid of all the emotions and feelings that I experience. They're very, very transcendental. Yet, when one of the gopis sees that another gopi, like Krishna has a need, and this gopi is so much better at doing this than I am, so they push that gopi forward. Rather than we see what's happening in this material world, is we'll fake it so I can be the one that goes forward. Whereas the person who's more expert at it, we push them back. We're always trying to push ourselves forward. So that's material. In the spiritual world, you don't have that. The focus in the spiritual world is Krishna's satisfaction, whereas here the focus is my satisfaction, and everyone else's. I'll stand on them, trying to climb to the top of the ladder. I'll use them as stepping stones. Very, very completely opposite from what it needs to be, because we just here we're just exploiting others for my own gain. Whereas in the spiritual world, we don't exploit anyone. We're just interested in Krishna's satisfaction, and that's what we need to develop. We can have that here. We don't need to wait to go back to Goloka. We can have that same transcendental experience here, but we need to develop this idea that Krishna's pleasure has to be the central thing. Because as long as my pleasure is involved in it, then it's contaminated. Yeah? Yes, sir.
Just this point of how the fish is considered a
How the fish is what?
Considered a bird to be just not a massive fish.
Yeah.
So most of the time, I see the bird is like that. The animal is always. So I don't want to develop always to see that, understand the value of the bird, understand how they actually.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I get glimpses of the values of devotees, and I do think it's worth practicing. One thing is gratitude. Just like, every day we come before Radha Gopinath or Srila Prabhupada and just be so thankful that we're part of this movement. I mean, because if I reflect on what I was doing before, that I was given this opportunity to chant the holy name and associate with devotees, it was a very, very, ghastly situation, actually, abominable. And so we can reflect on that and look at, how we've been very fortunate and blessed, but also to, serve the devotees by serving the devotees, and that takes many different forms. It doesn't necessarily mean like you're sort of bowing down. It can mean that you're bowing down and doing menial service to the devotees, and it's a good thing to do that. And we see even in the lives of our great acharyas like Narottam Das Thakur, when I just reflect on that, I was reflecting on that the other day, when he was serving Lokanath Goswami, he was cleaning the place where he passed stool with his hands, as mentioned, with his bare hands. So he was actually picking up the stool with his bare. I mean, I just couldn't imagine doing that. I couldn't imagine me having that feeling towards someone where I'd pick up their stool with my bare hands and dispose of it somewhere so they could have a clean place to pass stool. But he was doing that. That sort of just helps you to see how deep his humility was, that he didn't think that he was a great person. So by serving others, it helps us to diminish this mentality of being the master. That's why, like in materialistic people, they think that, to take this service position is so fallen. But actually we can understand, from the transcendental perspective, it is the highest position to be in. So high that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, or Lord Krishna, in order to understand this service relationship, manifested as Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this is given as one of the external reasons why he appeared, was to understand the service relationship. And we see, if we look in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that there is only one master or controller, Ekala Ishvara Krishna, Asabhidamrita. All others, they dance as he makes them do so. That includes every single Vishnu incarnation, or every single expansion of Godhead. They all take a service position to Krishna. What Balaram does, Nityananda does, they all take a service position to Krishna. So when we see that all these amazingly great personalities take that service position to Krishna, why don't we do the same? It's a lesson for us, is we need to also take that service position. But the problem is we, because of our material conditioning, we think that taking a service position is lesser. Lord Chaitanya has come to show that it's greater. It's even greater than Krishna himself, because when one actually becomes a servant of Godhead, a real servant of God, then you become so great that you control even God. And that's manifested in the lives of the Brajbasis and others, how they actually control Krishna by their love. And you can see the same there is there in like an ordinary relationship. Up at when I was up at New Gokul, we were reading from chapter 22 and chapter 23 of the same canto, and it's talking about when Swayambhuva Manu gave Devahuti to Kadamba Muni, and then the next chapter is talking about their marriage, and how Devahuti served Kadamba Muni, and actually by that service relationship, she completely controlled Kadamba Muni, without having, like it's like you don't have to kind of use this kind of like, like sometimes you see in relationships, the wives will be nagging the husband, and the automatic response to that is like you push back on it. You just, it's unpleasant. But then if the wife has this service attitude, and then when she comes to the husband, oh my dear Prabhu, you've always looked after me so wonderfully. And she talks with sweet words, and then says, I have this need, and the husband just like melts. What is it I can do for you? But if you come with this exactly the same need, and why you're always a lazy fellow, you're never doing this and you're never doing that, what's the husband's response? Forget it. Just get out of my face. So, there's a psychology involved. So to develop this mood of respecting the other Vaishnavas, the best way to do that is to serve them. But not just like, obviously it starts with the externality, but it has to become a deep internal thing. And we get to this point where Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says this Trinada Pisuni Chena Turori Vasishna Amanina Manadina Kitanya Sadhari. This Amanina Manadina, not expecting respect for myself, but willing to offer all respect to others. Because the real thing I see there is it actually gets down to respect. If we don't respect someone else, how can we see them in a good light? And that's the problem in this world, is there is no respect for anyone. Unless, if you've got a lot of money, someone will respect you. Why? Because they want your money. So it's not even respect. It's just they want something from you. So we need to move beyond that. We need to actually develop deep respect for every living being. And this is also taught by Kapila Dev in the third canto here, about developing respect for every living being. Why? Because the super soul is situated in the heart of that living being. That body is a temple of God. So, it's a very kind of rudimentary understanding. But that's where it needs to start with, is we have to start respecting not just the devotees, but every living being. And that's when the compassion develops. We see how great preachers, they have compassion for every living being. They want to give every living entity the opportunity to come to Krishna because they have respect. So you can see, developing as a devotee is much broader than just chanting Hare Krishna, being in the kirtan, doing some service. It's much, much broader than that. It means a whole shift of consciousness. We have to give up 100% this past conditioning and just completely change our way of looking at the world, our way of looking at everything. Hope that answers your question. Okay. Thank you very much, Srila Prabhupada ki, Samaveta Bhaktivinoda ki, Jai Nitai Gaur Premanandi, Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Janasha, whenever I drink, I look up at the roof.